Madison is our staff member. That's okay. She doesn't need to be on there. No.
Okay. So we are waiting for some others.
Yeah, Justin James and Susan Hajnek. They are panel members.
Not there. Oh, wait, Justin James. I'm just bringing him in.
Perfect.
To the deputy clerk, we didn't hear from Miss Hajnik. There's been no regrets or anything like that.
I have not, through you, Mr. Chair, I have not heard any regrets from those other two members.
Grant Lindsay has sent his regrets.
Okay.
Susan is the only one I have not heard from.
Okay, we'll just wait one more minute and then I'll just go ahead and start.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, we also are streaming live. Okay, I have someone waiting to chat, Jim H. Does anybody recognize?
I'm going to suggest that's the mayor and he will be an attendee.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call this October 7th, 2024 Committee of Adjustment meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. This meeting will be held virtually where committee members, staff, and the public can participate electronically. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available on the township website. Notice is hereby provided that under the authority of the Municipal Act 2001 and in accordance with the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, that all information attained is considered part of the public record. All rules apply to the meeting as if everyone was attending in person. And if there is a problem with the technology impacting the proceedings of a meeting, the meeting may be recessed at the call of the chair. Mr. Lindsay has sent his regrets for this evening. Moving on, can I get a confirmation of the agenda this evening? Councillor Broderick, seconded by Councillor Willis. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? I'm having to flip between the top bar to see members, so I'll just take a minute. And just for members, every electronic chair does things a little differently. I will pay attention to your hand, your physical hand in front of your screen if for both calling votes and if you wish to be recognized. Sometimes that can be a little quicker than putting up the little raised hand feature. Okay, can I get a adoption of the Committee of Adjustment minutes, a confirmation of the minutes of the July 2nd, 2024 Committee of Adjustment meeting? Councillor Broderick, seconded by Mr. James.
Could we
any edits, errors, or omissions? Councillor Broderick?
Yes, Chair. If you could, again, I'm Councillor Ward 3, and I'm just asking the question. I noticed there's 3 regrets, but the 3 people are also listed as being present.
Staff, you got those
Yes.
noted?
Thank you. We'll note that and make sure those changes are made.
Okay. So with those changes to the minutes, any further ones? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion is carried. And now we come to public meeting 5.1 D13-008 2024 140 Creighton Drive, Braydon, Norris, minor variance. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, through the chair. So I'm going to combine items 5.1 and 5.2 as they're very similar variances. So to keep it moving. So planning staff has received applications for 140 and 144 Creighton Drive to increase the lot coverage of a semi-detached unit from 43% to 48.4% to allow for the construction of an attached carport. Staff are recommending approval of the applications as they comply with the 4 tests of minor variance. First, they meet the general intent of the official plan as the proposed use is in keeping with the low-density residential designation. Secondly, the general intent of the zoning bylaw is met as the carport will act as an accessory use to the semi-detached units. Thirdly, the variance is considered appropriate as it will allow for the efficient use of the land to support the overall residential use. And lastly, the variance can be considered minor as the proposed increase in lot coverage will not cause negative impact on the neighboring properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffin. Any questions from members to Mr. Griffin based on the presentation? Councillor Willis.
Thank you, through the chair. We have recently seen other minor variance applications from the same applicant. I'm just wondering, do we know how many properties he owns? Are we doing an entire subdivision by minor variances, or is this it?
Through the chair to committee member Willis, it's my understanding that this is the last lot they own in this subdivision. This subdivision was developed by a developer, but then each individual lot was sold to builders. The applicant is a builder, and it's my understanding this is the last lot. We did work with the applicant, as you may remember, previous applications were for a setback because there was not a garage or carport. And we did receive comments from neighbors with concerns that there wasn't a carport or garage. So the applicant did make efforts to try and work with the neighboring landowners and to put a carport on. But unfortunately, with the carport, this time around, he needed a variance for lot coverage because it created too large of a footprint on the lot. But in short, it's my understanding that this will be the last lot developed by the applicant in this phase of the subdivision.
Before I go any further, Deputy Clerk, I think Councillor Broderick is for some reason in the attendees. If you could upgrade him.
Yes, I will do that most certainly.
Thank you. Any other members' questions with regard to staff's report? I'll wait for Councillor Broderick to come and see if he has any. Any from Mr. Preston? Oh, Ms. Hajnik is here with us. That's great. Mr. James, anything?
Nothing.
Okay. Is the applicant present, Deputy Clerk?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, he is present.
Does he wish to speak to the application?
Let me just bring them in as a panelist.
Okay.
Okay, they are now in the room as a panelist.
Mr. Norris, would you like to speak to the application at all? Oh, you're on mute. No, you're okay. All right. I think I can intuit that Mr. Norris is fine. Okay, well then I'll turn back to the clerk. Are there any members of the public, either in chambers with you or online, who wish to speak to this application?
So what I'm going to ask, Mr. Chair, if there's anybody who wants to raise their hands, because I'm seeing several individuals right now as attendees. I will just give them a moment and see if anyone does raise their hand. Okay, I was just testing it, make sure it was working. Okay, I'm not seeing it at this time. Anyone who's raising their hand to speak on this item.
I'll just turn back to the committee if there's any further questions. Otherwise, I'll move to the recommendations. Okay, since staff presented both of these together, we're still going to have to do them separately. So we'll just do them in order, one to the other. So the first report, SR 2779. The recommendation is that the report from the Development Services Division, October 7th, 2024, re 140 Creighton Drive, Braydon, Norris, minor variance be received, and that the minor variance application D13008-2024, affecting property described as part of Lot 19, Plan 29M66, Part 4, 29R11183 in the former township of Ernestown, Loyalist Township, in the county of Lennox and Addington, and more particularly located at 140 Creighton Drive in Odessa, to increase the lot coverage of a semi-detached lot from 43% to 48.4%, section 5.14.5.10.2E, be approved, subject to the following conditions, that the variance only applies to the location as identified on the drawings submitted with the application. Can I get a mover to move that recommendation? Councillor Broderick, seconded by Councillor Willis. Any comments on that? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, raise your hand so I can see them. Motion is carried. Excellent. And now we'll move to the second one. The recommendation is that the report from the Development Services Division, October 7th, 2024, re 144 Creighton Drive, Braydon, Norris, minor variance be received, and that the minor variance application D13009-2024, affecting property described as part of Lot 19, Plan 29M66, Part 3, 29R11183 in the former township of Ernestown, Loyalist Township, in the county of Lennox and Addington, and more particularly located at 144 Creighton Drive in Odessa, to increase the lot coverage of a semi-detached lot from 43% to 48.4%, section 5.14.1.10.2E, be approved, subject to the following conditions, that the variance only applies to the location as identified on the drawings submitted with the application. Can I get a mover to that effect? Councillor Willis, seconded by Ms. Hajnik. Any comments? All those in favor? Motion is carried. We now come to 5.3, D13010-2024, 142 Lodge Street, Louis Briggs, minor variance. And I'll turn to Mr. Griffin.
Thank you. Through the chair. The application for 142 Lodge Street is proposing 2 detached decks and 2 sheds under 15 square meters within the floodplain. Relief from the interior, rear, and front yard setbacks are being requested, as section 4.11D of the zoning bylaw does not allow for any part of the floodplain to be used to calculate the yard setbacks. Therefore, to allow for development, the setbacks need to be reduced to 0. The application is also seeking relief from section 4.11B to reduce the setback from the regulatory floodplain line from 15 meters to 0 meters, as well as section 4.14 to increase the height of an accessory building from 4 meters to 4.5 meters to permit a detached garage. The property is located along Lake Ontario. The applicant, during pre-consultation, worked closely with the Conservation Authority to determine the accurate floodplain. CRCA has outlined that they do not have any concerns with the proposed development. Planning staff are recommending approval of the applications as it complies with the 4 tests of a minor variance. First, the general intent and the purpose of the official plan is met as the use is permitted in the low-density residential designation, and consultation was completed with the Conservation Authority, which found that there was no natural hazard concerns. As well, the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaws met as the requested variances will not negatively impact the streetscape, conflict with neighboring uses, or aggravate the natural hazards. Thirdly, the requested variances are considered appropriate development of the land as the buildings will not aggravate the existing flooding hazard, and the increased height of the garage will allow for the storage of a boat as well as motor vehicles. Lastly, the variance is considered minor as the sheds and decks are considered by the province and Conservation Authority to pose little to no risk of the natural hazards. As well, the proposed location of the garage is minor as it will follow floodproofing standards as well as be set back and buffered by trees from neighboring properties. The proposed increase in height is minor as the increase does not create any shadowing or privacy concerns as the space will not be habitable and contains a large setback from neighboring properties. Staff did receive a letter from a neighboring property owner outlining concerns. The main concern was the proposal blocking views from the neighboring property as well as from Lodge Street. Staff did review these concerns and are still recommending approval as it does meet the 4 tests, considering that there is no easements or rights from the neighboring property over the view. As well, there's nothing in the official plan that requires the view plane to be maintained. As well, from Lodge Street, the proposal does not block any of the view from the water from Lodge Street. When you're looking straight down Lodge Street, you can still see it. You'd still be able to see the water and the island. As well, there was also a concern regarding the western shed having a negative impact on the overall streetscape of Lodge Street. Staff did recognize this early on, and we are requiring condition number 2, which would require the applicant to plant a vegetative buffer to maintain the streetscape so that there's a separation between the shed and the street. But with that, staff are recommending approval of the applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. I'll turn to the committee now first for questions of Mr. Griffin on the report. Councillor Willis.
I have a couple through the chair. So the sheds would be 0 meters away from the neighboring properties. But no neighbors have come to us and lodged a concern about that.
Through the chair to Councillor Willis, no. So the sheds and decks, although we're reducing it to 0 meters, the purpose of that is that there is a clause in the zoning bylaw that says that no part of any portion of the floodplain would be used as a zoning standard. So because the decks and the sheds are totally within the floodplain, while they are set back from the rear yard, interior yard, and front yard, we reduced it to 0 because it has to be nil because we can't use those setbacks. So we are tying it to the drawing. So the shed is going to be 1.2 meters from Lodge Street. As well, all the other sheds will be large. The shed on the eastern side will be, I believe, over 1.5 or 2 meters from the neighboring property line. As well, the decks and sheds will be sufficiently set back from the water or from the rear lot line, if you will, or the interior side yard. It's just we're reducing it to 0 because we're not allowed to use any of those actual setbacks because it is within the floodplain and we can't use the interior front yard or rear yard as a zoning performance standard. Yeah.
Through the chair again.
Go ahead.
Is there any risk to the township if we allow something to be constructed in the floodplain if we had another high water event like 2017? Is there any risk to us because we have approved it?
Thank you. Through the chair, from my understanding, not overly, considering that the province has recently changed regulations, which allows for what is being proposed to be built within the floodplain, so the 2 decks and the 2 sheds, to be permitted as of right and not require any permitting, as they established it as low-risk development. However, our zoning bylaw has not caught up to that regulation, as it was just passed on April 1st of 2024, as well as the CRCA just updated theirs as well. So we have not updated our zoning bylaw to reflect that. But as we are working through our zoning bylaw, our zoning bylaw update, that is something that we are going to review, and so that things like this wouldn't come to a committee of adjustment meeting, as it is permitted without a building permit and without a CRCA permit, as it's low risk development.
Go ahead, Councillor Willis.
Sorry, anyone else can jump in if they want to.
Yeah, I'll give you one more and then I'll check others. And
Thank
then we'll
you.
come back.
And through the chair, the garage. So it's going to be 4.5 meters high. How is that exceeding what is allowed?
Well, the accessory building provisions in the zoning bylaw require the maximum height of a garage to be 4 meters. So the increase is 0.5 meters.
So that's quite minor. And I know there's just a concern about the garage being built at all, but you're saying that it's without that additional 0.5 meters, it would meet the zoning bylaw and there'd be nothing to stop it.
Through the chair to Councillor Willis, what would be required is the relief from the floodplain setback. So the CRCA has outlined that the floodplain setback is at the 76.1 gradient plus 45 meters for wave uprush. So the garage is being built 45 meters from the 76.1 grade. So essentially the setback from the floodplain line is 0 meters. However, the requirement from the CRCA is that there be floodproofing, as well as the finished grade would be built up a bit. So that would be relief, even if that would require relief even without the height increase. But the 2 variances for the garage are the setback from the floodplain line as well as the height.
And I drove by the property today and the house is closer to the water than the garage would be, correct?
That's right.
So they'd have a bigger
That's
problem.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Other members of the committee with questions? Ms. Hajnik, Mr. James, Mr. Broderick. Okay, then I'm going to go and turn it to the applicant, who I think is about to be put up to a panelist. Ms. Deputy Clerk.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. He's just entering now.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'll try and share my screen here. I just have a brief presentation that I was hoping to give to outline my project to the committee. Let's see here. This one. Could you please confirm you see a PDF file viewer?
I can. I'm just looking at other committee members. Councillor Willis can. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Please proceed, Mr. Briggs.
I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. So my name is Louis Briggs. I'm the applicant at 142 Lodge Street in Bath. I really appreciate the opportunity to present here at the committee meeting. I was hoping to give just a bit more context on my project. Sometimes it can be a bit difficult to see from a site map, as well as to address some of the concerns that were raised by my neighbor at 385 Main Street. So my presentation has 2 parts. The first part is just to provide that context on the project. Second part is to address those concerns. I did create this presentation while James was preparing the official report, so there is some duplicative content. Apologies, and I'll make sure I'll get through this within the allotted 10 minutes. So first and foremost, the township staff and the CRC worked together with myself to confirm that we are meeting the 4 tests of minor. So as James mentioned, we are in alignment with the official plan, the zoning bylaws. It's an appropriate development of the land, and the variances themselves are minor in nature. the most significant variance that I think that we're requesting is the floodplain setback. And we did some extensive work with the Conservation Authority. We work closely with them. They have external coastal engineering consultants that they leverage for this type of work. And they have confirmed that they support development in this area of my property. As was described, the height variance is only about 12% above what the bylaw describes today. So in itself is very much minor, and it's to simply support the intended use of the structure as a garage. Altogether, all of the accessory structures, whether it's the 2 sheds, the 2 decks, and the garage, altogether we're remaining significantly below the lot coverage limits under Loyalist Township bylaw. So we're not creating any densification in the neighborhood. And then lastly, both the garage and the accessory structures that we hope to construct here are in similar design to what already exists in the neighborhood. There are a dozen of examples of this type of construction that already exist. To go into a little bit more detail on the garage, because I think this is the most significant element of my application, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the intended use and the design and fit in the neighborhood. So as James described, we are looking to store some motor vehicles that require a taller than typical garage door. And working with the township staff, we did confirm this is an appropriate and accepted justification for this type of variance. The 4.5 is the absolute minimum that's required in order to meet that intended use. We're not asking for anything more. And as I mentioned, this is only about 12%. We have positioned the garage on the west side of our property. That's because our property has frontage on Lodge Street. We want to stay as close to our driveway and to the street as possible, since this is a garage. And lastly, there are no other garages or accessory structures that exist on the property today. The garage itself is less than 3% of lot coverage, so we're well below the 10% threshold that the township maintains. The building is surrounded by large trees. We have the benefit of about 50 large mature trees that surround our property. As I mentioned, we're building to an aesthetic that matches or that's common in the village of Bath already today. The building won't be any taller than our existing house. It will be a smaller footprint than the existing house. So it very much will resemble an accessory structure. It will be secondary to the primary residential use of the property. And then lastly, as I mentioned previously, there is a lot of precedent for this in the township. I had a chance to review some of the prior meeting minutes for Committee of Adjustments, and it seems just about 5 months ago, the committee approved a 5.3 meter detached garage that was closer proximity to neighboring properties. So that would be the detail I'd like to share here on the garage. To provide a bit more context on what this will look like, so just a south and a front and a side view. So as you can see, just 2 garage doors and a man access door on the right-hand side. And the aesthetic will be kind of craftsman style, board and batten, typical in the village of Bath. The height that we're requesting is driven by the height of the garage door, as I mentioned. So a 10-foot garage door requires at an absolute minimum an 11-foot wall height, and then you add just a typical roof pitch on top, and that's how you land at the 4.5. And as I mentioned, this is certainly something that's common in the village. I just overlaid on this map some examples of detached garages that exist in the village of Bath. So those are the dots in red, not a comprehensive list, but certainly there are many of different sizes, shapes, designs that exist throughout this community, the majority of which are closer to neighboring properties than what I'm proposing today. All right, so on to the second part of my presentation. I've received some feedback from my neighbor at 385 Main Street that I would like to address. I've broken this up into 2 subparts. The first is on the garage. The second is on the shed on the west side of my property. So for the garage, I'll speak here to setback, height, and then view, most importantly. So the garage itself will be built about 136 feet, 41.5 meters away from my neighbor's home. And when it comes to the north property line, the typical setback would be 1.2 meters. We're 16.5 meters away from that, so 14 times the setback that's required by the township for building this type of accessory structure. And it's actually the floodplain setback variance that enables us to build that garage farther away from our neighbor's property. If it weren't for that variance, we would have to build the garage 15 meters further north, and that we have some very large significant trees there that would have to be cut down, gardens that would have to be removed. So I think it's in our interest as well as our neighbor's interest to have the garage built with this variance intact. From a height perspective, as James mentioned, We're only going a little bit over the height bylaw, and at this distance, 136 feet away from their home, that has a very insignificant impact on vertical field of view. When it comes to the view itself, I think this is the most important part of this application, is there are no viewing easements through my private property. There are no municipal ordinances that require this type of sightline through private property to be maintained. And even though we're proposing to build the garage, the neighbor will continue to have ample views through our property if they desire. And as James mentioned, there is no restriction on any public area as a result of the construction of these structures for this particular neighbor. This neighbor also has some accessory structures on the south side of their property, which do impede the same view that's being discussed today. And between fences and other accessory structures, the entirety of the view south from Main Street is obstructed by this property. And these elements here just contradict the concerns that are being raised. And then lastly, we are talking about a view over a very large distance, over 360 feet away. And so, the structures of these size over that distance have a minimal impact on field of view. This diagram here is the output of some calculators online that can show impact of height on vertical field of view. So a typical human being has a 90-degree field of view. On the left-hand side is the approximate height of a 2-story building. On the right-hand, that's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is the difference between a 4-meter and a 4.5-meter structure. Horizontally, you have the distance between the two structures. And as you can see, the impact on vertical field of view is negligible. Lastly, looking at horizontal field of view. So here I present an aerial view. At the top in white is my neighbor's property at 385 Main Street. The view here in blue is the southbound view down Lodge Street. As you can see, the entirety of the view along Lodge Street all the way through to the beach at the bottom of Lake Ontario is completely unimpeded by the construction of the garage. I wanted to provide a bit more context that doesn't necessarily show up on a site map. So the area here is a view from the east side of my property looking west. As you can see, I have a large open vacant place on my property surrounded by large trees. This is the area where the garage will be constructed. And as you can see, you can hardly even see houses on the other side of the street. There's a lot of foliage here. I also wanted to address any potential concern from view from the water. So again, there's a ton of trees, tree lines that are built up around the property. This is the view looking north from the water. You would not be able to see the shed nor the garage looking through this space. So moving on, last piece of the presentation, just to justify the storage shed that's on the west side of the property. Here I've broken it into setback from Lodge Street and then any impacts to view. So the area that's south of my driveway, as you might see on the site plan, is more practically used as a side yard. It's kind of the private amenity space of my property, and that's because of the shape of the property. It's the orientation of the house that was originally built in 1960, and the continuity of Lodge Street all the way through to Lake Ontario, which isn't very typical. And so I'm proposing here that the typical 1.2 meter side yard setback be used as a more appropriate for this location of my property. I have a very long frontage on Lodge Street, and so there will still remain a significant portion of my property where there will be no structure. There's also a very large drainage ditch that's adjacent to my property line on the west side of my property. And if you were to factor that width, you actually get to over 8 meters from the edge of Lodge Street to where I'm building this accessory structure. That would actually exceed the 7.5 meter requirement. And I'll show some pictures just to show that later. The proposed sheds being built farther away from the shoreline than existing structures at the end of Lodge Street. So we're building farther back than our existing home as well as our neighbor's home. And standing at the beach, you of course would not be able to see the shed. It would be 65 feet behind you. And then lastly, there are 3 streets in the village of Bath that are very similar. There is Lodge Street, Davie Street, and Church Street, all of which have very similar construction at the end. And I'll show some pictures here as well. In terms of the view, I want to reiterate the point that there are no viewing easements over my property and no municipal ordinances that require that type of private sightline. We have tons of tree line here that are protecting any view. The shed will be almost invisible when looking from the north. We're talking about a viewing distance over 250 feet. And lastly, the requirement from the township to plant some trees and hedges in this area. We've already fulfilled that. Those have already been planted. Just some pictures to reinforce the point. So here on the left-hand side, we're on Lodge Street looking north. On the right-hand side here is my neighbor's property at 385 Main Street. As you can see, there is an accessory structure, a storage shed that's located about 5 meters from the edge of Lodge Street. A neighbor just next door, about 5 meters for a garage type structure. Looking south on Lodge Street, you can see just barely through the trees here, you'd see the stick framing of where I started the shed about a year ago prior to going into this process. And you can see it's about 8 meters from the edge of Lodge Street. Looking a few streets over, so onto Davie Street, you can see there's there's a home here that's about 4 meters from the edge of Davie Street. Looking at Church Street, I believe back in 2009, there was a shed constructed for the Fairfield home at the end of Church Street, a similar setback about 5 meters from the edge of the road. So just to reiterate, lots of precedent for this, and with the significant tree lines and existing setbacks, should be very minor in nature. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Briggs. I'll turn to the committee if there are any questions for Mr. Briggs. Just looking. Okay, thank you, Mr. Briggs.
Thank you.
I'll now turn back over to the deputy clerk to see if there is anyone in the virtual or council chambers audience that wishes to speak to the application.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, we do have someone in the virtual audience, so I will just bring them in right now.
Okay.
We've got 2 individuals, so I'm going to bring them both in.
Okay. Okay, Joy and Peter. Joy, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, I'd like to thank everybody tonight for taking the opportunity to listen to us over this problem. I tried to address it at council a few weeks ago, but was unable to say very much about this situation. So here we are tonight. This problem came my way just a couple weeks ago, thrown on me without knowing. Seeing a sign posted on a tree down below me, saying that my neighbors intended to build structures all along their property to block all the water view from my property that I had purchased 32 years ago. He talks about the structures on Lodge Street here, one of them being mine and the other one being on the other side of the street. Those were there when we purchased it. Those were historical buildings. So to use them as representation, what his new shed is that he started building without permission, it's no representation with the buildings that were already on the property when we bought them. Me or my neighbor didn't build anything the way we had it. This is historical property. My house being one of the oldest, the street was built around my property. Also, saying streets adjacent to it, that's not our street. And those properties were all built a long time ago too. To say it's in line with the properties in Bath, our area is not a normal property. We're in the historical business section. There's only 2 streets that are the business sections where you can buy an ice cream and walk down the street and see the waterfront. My street happens to be one of them, and that's why I bought it with my business right in the middle of downtown. Never expecting, as Doug the Barber owned the property, it would ever change. It was supposed to be floodland forever. But October 1st, I guess a lot of things change as I'm finding out. I go to the township on Monday morning. I talk to Mr. James. Mr. James, as I ask for something to show me, he shows me a map and shows me where a floodplain is. I got little to no information in that meeting and had to set out to do my own investigation on what was going on. It took me a week before I was able to get a meeting with the head staff of the engineering department. She explained to me another flood line on that property. They had given me two different flood lines. I had to go to Cataraqui, get information from them. They said everything's going way too fast. The township James told me when I went to him, he said that they only had to give me 10 days notice that this would happen, as the province says, but they were giving me 20. I had no 20 days notice. I only had a few weeks to get this all together. An average person couldn't do what I did, the legwork I did. 2 days ago, a petition was signed on change.org. This was an environmental protected land on flood land, and overnight it's been changed, and this applicant knew it and has worked with the township. Always before, Cataraqui ruled what happened around here. Cataraqui Conservation, that's who I worked with for many years. So I know exactly what happened in Bath because I've been here for many years and protected many a land and trees along the waterfront with my grandkids. So when I go to Cataraqui, they say everything is going too fast. The township gets comments from the Cataraqui, but I don't get them for 2 weeks. The comments said that the land was environmentally protected, but then the township staff, engineers, tell me that the Cataraqui had written it wrong, even though they hadn't read the comments that they had for 2 weeks. It took me 2 weeks to get the comments from the township that the Cataraqui said I should have. When I questioned the township, it was environmentally protected flood land. They said that they were changing it at the Cataraqui level. So I'm sorry, guys. Everything's going way too fast here and it needs to slow down. We will not see the waterfront very shortly if this continues the way it's going. That was swampland, as the elders have written to me a long time ago. People need to see the waterfront. We have a family next door that lives right beside me. They showed the other building on the other side of the street. That's a family of 3 little boys and a mom and dad. They live there in the wintertime. In the summertime, it's a short-term rental. They were there all for a whole year last year. And I heard the little boy say to the mom the other day, Mom, it's public, we can go down there. And she said, no, it's private. And I said to her, no, hon, it's public. You can go down there. And he said, Mom, I told you so. That family was going to write a letter tonight to this. They didn't have time. Everything's going so quickly. I had no time. Right now there's a change.org. A petition started 2 days ago. It has 29 signatures and as I left at 5:30. It says hull construction on floodlands and protected lands in Loyalist Township. Guys, you got to at least defer this until everybody can look at this. This new homeowner has come in and knows these laws changed overnight and is going to destroy our downtown. And within 10 days, 14 days, nobody has a say. Everybody in the village is just finding this out now. And if you go to change.org, you'll see, and everybody's upset that this is coming way too fast. I wouldn't even had a council meeting to talk to. The next council meeting is tomorrow. It's not fair. An elder can do this. Nobody can stand up for their properties. Our historical properties mean something to us, guys. You guys know that, how much we put into this village to keep it historical. Don't let somebody like this come in and do this to us overnight. Please look at this closely. This is an aerial view of my neighbor's property. He can put his garage in another area that's not in floodplain. He can move the gardens that you see in it. That can be moved anywhere that they just put there a couple of years ago. He doesn't have to block the view from me and everybody walking down the main street. There's other places he could put his garage on this property that wouldn't affect anybody from the water views. And the shed he built, he started it without getting permission for it. He only stopped because he got stopped. He knew he was built on floodplain. So please, people, these new people can't come in and do this to us. We got to stand up for our rights. And you know I'll stand up hard and long. Please help with a fight here, guys. I'd like to introduce you to Peter Bennett here. He'd like to say a few words.
Go ahead, Mr. Bennett. I just want to remind everybody, for the benefit of the audience, the time that he 3 minutes. I know that Ms. Silver is quite passionate about this, as I'm sure you are too. But just keep in mind to try and keep it as much to time as you can. But please proceed.
Thank you for your attention tonight. I'm Peter Bennett. I have two properties, waterfront properties in the village of Bath that I may want to build buildings on at some time in the future. So what I'm really asking for tonight is clarification of the section under Natural Hazards, Ontario Regulation 4142. It says the regulatory floodplain includes a static flood level of 76.1 meters GSC, where Loyalist Township prohibits structures being erected there. The next paragraph states the proposed garage will be located 45 meters from the static flood level of 76.1 meters GSC. However, the survey map that you've provided with the application, the site plan, grading plan, indicates there's a number of areas surrounding the proposed site of the garage that are below the static flood level of 76.1 meters. One of those spots is right at the southwest corner of the proposed garage, and a number of others are both to the east and and north of the site. We note that the intended use of the building is not to be residential, but the building uses sometimes change over time, as evidenced by the marina that is near my my present residence. It was given a building permit only as a commercial building, and then later they changed that to residential. So now this site, that if it started as residential, it wouldn't have been given a building permit, but it kind of got there through the back door. So these things do change over time. I grant you that property owners should be allowed freedom to enjoy their properties as they see fit. Waterfront properties do provide an element of public good for all who pass by and enjoy the sight lines to the water and waves. It is probably impossible to write regulations to address this, but some care should be taken to preserve this if possible. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll return now to the deputy clerk. I believe there was somebody else that wanted to speak.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I did bring someone else in if they would like to speak. I see there's Mr. Silver as well.
Jim Silver. Yep.
Yes.
Mr. Silver, if you would like to speak, you're welcome to. You've got 3 minutes.
Okay, the elephant in the room, and through you, Mr. Chair, I wonder, how does the staff define building heights? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mr. Silver. Unfortunately, the context for this kind of interjection isn't a back and forth between staff. Unfortunately, I can't field questions from the public direct to staff. It's more enabling you to comment on how the application might affect you in particular. I know if you email staff will be able to have a conversation with you about that, but the meeting isn't exactly the context where that can happen, unfortunately.
Well, I assume the height is from the existing grade to the top of the peak of the roof of the proposed building, correct? Like, why would a height be to the midspan of the trusses and not to an upfill needed to get out of the floodplain? And I too appreciate the use of the property should be not defined by somebody else's view, but that is the reason why there's a maximum height of 4 meters, right? And you're asking for an exemption of 4.5, but the plans show that the 4.5 only takes it to mid-height of the trusses. And then plus you're bumping up with upfill of 300 millimeters all the way around. So that puts it, I would calculate, about 5.5 meters, which is significantly increased over the 4 meter bylaw requirement. So I believe you're setting a pretty major precedent by looking at that's what I have to say. It's not the location per se, although I think it may impact the trees that are there, and that is what it is. But the height does seem like it's going to be. My sister may be looking at the a drive-in theater wall or type of stuff. Okay, that's my say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Silver. I'll turn it back now to the deputy clerk to see if there are any more members of the public.
I'll ask if anybody wants to raise their hand. I'm not seeing any at this time.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
Madam Deputy Clerk. I'll turn back to the committee now if there's any further questions for staff. Councillor Willis.
Through the chair to staff, there was some discussion about environmental protection. Is there any, it was mentioned that it's zoned residential 1. Is there any part of this property that's zoned EP?
Through the chair, to committee member Willis, no, the property is entirely zoned residential 1, as well. The official plan designation is entirely low density residential.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for members of the committee? Okay, there is a recommendation with the report, which I will read and decide what they wish to do. I'm going to read it in full for the benefit of the public. So the recommendation is that the report from the Development Services Division, October 7th, 2024, re 142 Lodge Street, Louis Briggs, minor variance be received, and that the minor variance application D13-010-2024 affecting property described as part of Lot 10, concession broken front in the geographic township of Ernestown as LA 66601, subject to LA 88497, and more particularly described as 142 Lodge Street, Bath, to A, reduce the rear yard setback for accessory buildings and structures from 1.2 meters to 0 meters, section 4.17B, to reduce the front yard setback for accessory buildings and structures from 7.5 meters to 0 meters, section 5.11.2C, structures from 1.2 meters to 0 meters, section 4.17A, to permit the placement floodplain be for the placement of 2 sheds and 2 detached decks under 15 square meters over regulatory floodplain be approved, subject to the conditions outlined below, and B, reduce the setback from the regulatory floodplain from 15 meters to 0 meters, section 4.11B, for a detached garage be approved, subject to the conditions outlined below, and C, increase the height of an accessory building from 4 meters to 4.5 meters, section 4.14, to permit a detached garage be approved subject to conditions outlined below. Those conditions are, number 1, that the approved variances apply only to the locations as identified on the drawings submitted with the application. 2, that the owner applicant plant a vegetative buffer between the proposed shed on the west side of the property and Lodge Street. 3, the owner obtain all necessary permits from Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority. And 4, that the owner floodproof the garage, accessory buildings, and decks as per CRCA comments dated September 12th, 2024. That is the recommendation. What are the committee's wishes? Councillor Broderick.
Sorry, I would move the recommendation and ask that we approve the minor variance applications outlined in the staff recommendation.
So moved. So Councillor Broderick is moving to adopt the recommendation as presented. Is there a seconder for that? Mr. James. So the motion is on the floor. Are there comments to the motion? Councillor Willis, our mover first. Sorry, Councillor Broderick, over to you.
Thank you. Just jumping between pages here. Simply put, the applicant has met the test of a minor variance. And I believe the applicant has done his best to design something that is sort of in the historical mode, I'll put it that way. You know, the applicant could have cut down a bunch of trees, which would have probably brought something else to the council or to this committee. The water view, again, there's no nowhere in policy or any of our regulations that says a person has a right to view something. The idea that Bath, you know, Bath has plenty of waterfront. In fact, I would say it's probably one of the best waterfronts that the township maintains. And I walked up and down Main Street, and never once have I looked down Lodge Street or any street to see the water. You know, as far as the Cataraqui Conservation Authority being the vice chair, I can understand that the frustration with the change of policy on April 1st, but that's not something that at this level we can deal with. And I would support the applicant's application as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Broderick. I'll go to the seconder to see if there's any comments for Mr. James.
Support the applicant the way he has presented it, and it seems that due care is maintained to address concerns as well. So our intent and zoning bylaws has been followed, and recommendations are duly noted.
Thank you. Councillor Willis.
I'll be supporting the motion, and you know, while I have empathy, you know, if you've enjoyed a water view and it's going to be changed in any way, it was very clear that there is no easement for that view. And I'm also struck that though the home on the property has been updated recently and extended, there has always been a building on that property. So since 1960, there's been the risk that someone would want to put a second story on the building, build a garage. So it's always been there. So I don't think anyone has the right to expect their neighbors to never improve their property.
Thank you. Any other members? Looking to Mr. Preston, Ms. Hajnik. In that case, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Sure, I can see hands. That motion is carried. Okay, no decisions or other business. Our upcoming meeting dates, our next meeting of the committee is November 4th, 2024. And I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Broderick, seconded by Councillor Willis. All those in favor? We are adjourned at 6:58 p.m. My thanks to the committee and to members of the public for their participation this evening. Good night, everyone.
Good night.